comes alive at around 6,000 RPM. Today we're having a look at one of the coolest cars that went on sale in 1999, and that is of course the gorgeous Honda S2000. This specific model here is an AP1. I want to talk about the differences from the AP1 to the AP2 that came out in 2003 and how you can tell them apart from a front, side and rear view. And then we're going to talk about the interior, and then last but not least we're going to take it for a short drive. Huge thanks to Rev Hard Motors in Denver for making this review happen. If you're into JDM cars, this is the place for you. Check out this S2000 and their entire inventory at revhardmotors.com. The idea for the S2000 was first unveiled in 1995 at the Tokyo Auto Show as the SSM concept, the Sport Study model, and it had some very cool and interesting graphic features. For example, the headlights in the concept, they actually sat down in the bumper, which means that it was one of the first cars to have the bumper headlights, which today is a huge trend among a lot of car manufacturers. But unfortunately, the SSM was not ready for production. So what they had to do is go back to the drawing board, keep the same proportions as the SSM, but work on the graphic details. For example, moving up the headlights from the bumper down here to the normal position that we have today. What I love about this front end is the simplicity of it. If you were to just update a few key features, for example, making this into an LED unit, and that's about it, then you can have a car that looks like it could come from 2023. I've made a couple of redesigns of the S2000 right here on the channel, and it's not really that hard to make it look like a modern machine thanks to the beautiful, timeless proportions of this car. This AP1 that we're having a look at today revs up to 9,000 RPM. However, it was very low on torque, so in 2003, Honda decided to release the AP2 with a little bit more torque, but unfortunately, the red line had to be reduced down to 8,000 RPM instead of the 9,000 that we have in this specific car. For the design changes of the AP1 into the AP2, the easiest way to tell them apart, if you have these intakes down here at the corner, which I think looks really good, nicely cut out in this flat surface. If you have these, if you see this on the front end of the S2000, that means that you have an AP1. If these are covered, if this area is covered and you have sort of another fin in the grille here, that means that you're looking at the AP2. There were some changes to the headlights as well, but I actually prefer the AP1. I think this looks unique and cleaner than the AP2. The AP2 still looks very good, but this is the original S2000 design, and it also revs to 9,000 RPM, which is what you want in the S2000. A couple of changes in the headlight here. For example, this amber piece turned into a round amber indicator on the AP2. I actually prefer this big orange piece that we have here. It gives the car a nice distinct front end and a unique identity. Now, usually one of my favorite view of 95% of cars is going to be the 3/4 rear view, but not in this case, because I love the front end of this car. The reason being, look at how beefy these fenders are and how they kind of bulge out and adds this muscle to this design. Super clean design over the fenders. It's almost flat up until the point where we reach the wheel arch. So the hood sits super low when you look at it from a side view, which you're going to do in just a second. And then you have these lines as well, emphasizing the beefiness of these front fenders, which I think is one of the most beautiful front fenders in a production car up until this point. So looking at the side view of the S2000, this is what I'm talking about. Have a look at the distance right here and how short this is. The hood sits super low. Another detail I love about the S2000 is look at the position of where the windshield starts. It's almost a little bit tilted to the front, but it's almost right in the middle of the entire length of the car. And it also has this beautiful 45-degree angle up, which I think roadsters should have. They should have a little bit more angle on the windshield than a hardtop, and I think this does that perfectly. And then we have this gorgeous line cutting into the body and into the corner of the taillight right here. In addition to this line that also carves up a little bit more mass in the side of the car, you can see that we have this sharp line cutting into the rear axle. And on the AP2, it's actually a lot more pronounced back here. This line actually continues in the AP1 as well. Like, you can barely see the line here, but in the AP2, they made that a lot more pronounced by carving this area out as well. All right, guys, coming back to the 3/4 rear view, this is still a very cool car from this angle, even though I prefer the slightly tilted front view view for this specific S2000. So this, as I said, is the AP1. So what is the differences here to the AP2? For example, you have 3 round circular lights in the AP2, while you only have 2 here. The indicator light is integrated separately on the AP2. One detail I love about this rear end is how they integrated a ducktail in the spoiler here, because you can see that the ducktail itself is actually the 3rd brake light. And the way this brake light follows the overall lines of the rear end is just a beautiful touch, and something you rarely saw on cars manufactured back in 1999. So this to me is a piece that definitely adds to that timeless design of the car. This looks like a modern piece of integration of a brake light, and it looks super cool actually adding this ducktail ending to the rear end. The bumper looks solid. It's a proper bumper. We don't really have designs like this today where you actually have a proper bumper. The diffuser down here is also different from the AP2. Here we have a separated part, so this part here is separate from the rest of the bumper, this black piece, while in the AP2 the exhaust pipe comes out of the bumper itself. And same thing here. This is another reason why I prefer the AP1 over the AP2, is the simple graphics in the front end and the side that I think looks better on the AP1. Another detail that's different from the AP2 on the AP1, I can't really demonstrate it here with this specific S2000 because of these aftermarket exhausts, but the AP1, actually these are round, so it kind of works. The AP1 had round tailpipes, and if you see an S2000 with the oval tailpipes, that means that you're looking at an AP2. Overall, I think this design, it works really well with the rest of the body. It connects to the side view, and these graphics of the taillights feel like they have a connection to the front end as well with the headlights in front. So it has a nice congruent design all around. You also have this line up here, which creates almost a similar line that we have on the front end bumper, and also adds to this muscleness in the rear. Very subtle design line, this piece, but if you look closer, you notice it, and you notice this piece actually has a peak of it. It sticks out and create this muscle over the rear axle, kind of the same way like we have in the front end. Welcome to the inside of the Honda S2000. The first thing you notice when you jump into this car is just how every single piece in here, every single function of the car is angled towards the driver. It feels like the passenger is sort of an afterthought. We have 2 vents for the driver angled towards me, and then we have 1 single lonely little vent on the passenger side. All the controls are right in reach. You can still hold onto the steering wheel, and you can adjust the climate control, for example, or you can adjust the radio here as well on the left side. I do like that we have a engine start button on this car. This has to be one of the first cars to have that. You still need to turn the key though, and then you push the start button, so it's kind of an additional step. That, of course, we have the fully digital, not fully, but digital gauge cluster, and this is one of the first cars in production to actually have a digital gauge cluster. And one of these graphic features that if you look at just the gauge cluster, you instantly know that this is an S2000. There's no glove box here, pretty unusual. And then you have a little bit of a storage compartment here. You have some more storage right here in the back, and that's about it for storage in this car. But again, this is a sports car. It's not really supposed to be a GT long cruiser car. If you need more storage, you always have the trunk. Let's fire it up real quick and see what this 2-liter engine is all about. Sounds really good from those aftermarket exhausts in the back. Another thing I love about the S2000 is the gearbox. Super short shifts and very tight. This has to be one of the best manual gearboxes ever produced in a car. Other than that, it's very simplistic in here. There is really nothing else to do than to sit in this car, and then the only thing you want to do is basically go for a drive, because that's the only thing you can do when you're sitting in this car. A couple more features in here. We have the button for the roof control right here in the center. We also have the hazard lights and a good old e-brake right here. You have the buttons for the windows here and the mirror adjustments. Pretty typical. There's nothing really crazy going on in the design of the interior, which I think suits the S2000. It feels like the exterior, the simplicity of the exterior kind of morphs into the interior as well. One design flow, line flow detail I love about this interior is how the dash itself kind of follows the lines and continues into the door. That's something that's becoming less and less common. Now we have a separation between those two sections, but I definitely prefer it when it has this nice flow going from the door and then into the dash. Let's take the Honda S2000 AP1 for a drive, and let's see what this fuss is all about. People love these cars. I can understand why from just a pure design standpoint, but this car is all about the drive. Not a lot of torque. And the clutch engages super high up. I thought I had a e-brake on when we were setting off here, but super high clutch. Oh yeah, it's all the way up at the very end. Here we go. It definitely doesn't feel super fast, but that's not what this is about, the Honda S2000. It's about the visceral feel of driving the car, and I think that's one thing that this car does really well. Still, that clutch, not used to it. It's gonna take a while to get used to. It's sitting so high up. Definitely comes alive at around 6,000 RPM, which means that you really have to rev this car if you really want to get the most out of it. And I think that's a fun car to have. I mean, it's a small 2-liter engine, inline-4 in the front end. It feels like that's just available at 6,000 RPM. Still a very fun car to drive. Specifically, how this thing handles. It feels like a go-kart. The cornering is just absolutely fantastic. Would this be a comfy daily driver? Probably not. But again, if you want to have a fun weekend car and just rip around the mountain roads and the back roads, I think this S2000 is the perfect car for you. It's not going to be a long GT cruiser car, but for what it's built for, to be a proper small little sports car, I think it doesn't get much better than this.